At this point, before we actually bring Max on, I would like to clarify some misinformation that is swirling regarding Max's presence here today. You may recall that in December, the entire District 18 delegation, including Senator Jeff Wallstrecker, were in attendance. In November, I sent an invitation to Max and Jeff for a joint appearance at the District 18 Breakfast Club. And at that time, I had requested a May 9th meeting for them after sine die. Max replied almost immediately, stating that he would attend. I followed up with Jeff on numerous occasions via phone, email, and text with no response. And when I saw Jeff at an early December fundraiser for a Senate candidate, I asked him if he was coming, and he stated that he had not received the invitation, or maybe it was in his spam folder. I said I would respond that night, which I did when I returned home. I continued to reach out and admit again via phone, text, and emails. And in mid-February, at Jeff's request, I sent another email on February 16th that included his scheduler, Dwayne, and stated that if I did not hear back from them by February 22nd, close of business, that would have been the Tuesday after President's Day, that I would invite Max to a 30-minute session by himself. There was no response, and I continued to remind both of them of my request. Finally, on March 7th, I sent a text to Jeff stating that since I had not heard from him, I would move forward with the Max-only session. Yes, today is sine die, and Jeff is not here, but he chose not to respond, and I requested Max to switch the day from May to today because it was convenient since we only had 2 speakers today, and then I was able to have the 6 sitting judges in May. So now I would like to move on to Max. Max is a community organizer and nonprofit leader with more than a decade of experience leading campaigns for progressive change at the local, state, and federal level. As a national organizer and campaign manager for Bend the Arc Jewish Action, Max organized more than a dozen highly effective grassroots chapters across the country and led national campaigns to win the DREAM Act and defeat Trump and the GOP at the ballot box. A resident of Silver Spring with his wife and 2 young children, Max has also been a co-founder of local progressive organizations like Montgomery County Racially Equity Network and the Silver Spring Justice Coalition. I would like to introduce Max.
Thank you, Susan. Hi, everybody. Good to be at the Breakfast Club with you. Very happy to be here on Max Day. Every single time, Max, we got a question, I was like ready to come off mute. I'm really excited to be here. I'm sorry that we couldn't do, an actual back and forth. I definitely believe that voters in this district deserve that, but we'll make do with just me. A little more about my backgrounds. So like Susan mentioned, I'm a community organizer, but about 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago, I was a religious school director, a Sunday school director at a Jewish temple in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I was recruited by Reverend William Barber into a grassroots protest movement, a faith-led movement in our state against a state legislature that was slashing the social safety net and endangering the right to vote in North Carolina. And that really changed my life. Up until that point, I had been very active in my community. I was very involved in social service work, running our food pantry, things like that at our congregation. But I had never gone up the river, quote, as they say, in organizing to, go to the root causes of things. And I think a lot of what we're going to end up talking about here today are root causes. We heard some of that in the previous discussion as well. So that was a big change for me. I turned to community organizing full time. I had the immense privilege to be able to make political organizing and advocacy my job, which most of us don't get the chance to do. I've been part of campaigns, as Susan mentioned, at all levels of government, all across the country. And here locally, I have worked mostly on housing issues and on policing and racial justice issues as well. I think there are major differences between myself and my opponent. I'm sure we'll get to some of those today in the questions, but Susan advised me to keep it short so we could get more questions in, and that's what I want to do as well. So I'm going to stop there, and I look forward to speaking with you.
Okay, so why did you finally decide to run for Senate in District 18?
Finally is definitely a good word for it. As some folks here probably are aware, a year ago, almost a year ago, a number of us in this district wrote an open letter about the growing frustration that we felt with our state senator on a number of key issues, particularly around police reform, LGBTQ civil rights, and others, but also about the meta issue of feeling like we were not being heard and represented in the decisions that were being made on our behalf in Annapolis. At that point, a number of us began discussing the idea of someone entering the primary to make it clear that this was a serious disagreement that needed to be dealt with because we weren't getting any kind of response. I was one of the people hoping to recruit, someone to run in this race. In the end, we couldn't find anybody who really wanted to do it, and the tables were turned on me. One of the folks I've been working with called me up and said, "Would you consider running?" And to be honest, it took me a month of talking to folks in the district to decide. It's not a decision that I made lightly. I got 2 young kids at home. They take a lot of my attention. But very similar to when I left my work 10 years ago to become an organizer, it felt like a moment for me where, it was something new for me, but it was the best thing that I could do with my time to fight for racial and economic justice, which are the things that really animate my professional life. So that is how I made the decision.
Okay, so in what ways do you, why do you think you would be a better senator than the incumbent? And please address in there, you discuss racial and economic justice. That is a small part of what you do in Annapolis. So how are you going to, why do you think you would be better on the wide range of issues that you would address in Annapolis?
I think there's a part of this that is about approach, I guess I would say, to the work in Annapolis. So obviously the legislature only meets for a few months out of the year, but representing a district is very much a full-time job that involves constituent services and constant outreach back into the community. And it involves dealing with regulatory agencies. So constituent services is not just about having a phone call, that you pick up when it rings. It's about actually following up and dealing with agencies that are sometimes very difficult to deal with. That's the experience that I do have as an organizer. That's what people in my profession do, is we engage with public officials and public agencies that are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And we train folks and bring them together at the community level to get what they need. And that can be, somewhat seemingly small examples like working with a worker center in Austin, Texas to get better protections for construction workers, building high-rise buildings in Austin because there had been multiple deaths from heat stroke, which is something I did 7 or 8 years ago. Or it can be much bigger picture, like working on a national campaign to cut funding to ICE, to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, because the funding was being used to harass immigrant families who had been here for decades. So I think there's a piece of this that is, we tend to think of elected officials as being policy experts. I do think I bring some policy expertise on certain issues, particularly housing, but a lot of this is really about understanding how to deal with agencies like the State Highway Administration or other agencies that can be recalcitrant and difficult to deal with. So that's a big part of it. But to your other question, the other half of your question about, the broader scope of issues, it may be a difference of perspective that I probably see a racial or economic justice component to almost every issue that folks have come to me with. But I will say that because I am involved in grassroots organizing in Montgomery County, I'm very lucky to have a wide network of folks who work on a number of different issues that are of regular concern and that appear before the General Assembly. That's everything from, green transit and stopping the Beltway expansion to climate issues. I actually do a web show for this campaign where I talk with policy wonks. And I'll be doing one with Jen Sass, who I think is still on here soon on PFAS. To me, all these things do have racial and economic justice components. But, whether or not anybody particularly sees it that way, I'm lucky to have a very diverse and wide range of experts and advocates on my team, and I will bring them with me into Annapolis.
You're muted, Susan.
You stated that this is a full-time job. Does that mean that if you are elected, you will truly work only as a state senator and have no other outside employment?
That's my goal. I will say financially, I have to make sure that's possible for me to do, but that's how I think the job should be treated. I'm also in favor, this is stuff that I rarely talk about at campaign events because it's like people's eyes glaze over, but it's serious. So I'm going to say it, like, we really do need some institutional reform in the General Assembly. And we still run the General Assembly the way that we did when Maryland was an agrarian colony, more or less. And one of the things I hear from advocates most often is the frustration that it takes 5 to 7 years to move big bills through the legislature, and a sense that there is just and this is not, against any particular delegate or senator, this is a systematic issue. But to take ghost guns as an example. So we finally passed ghost gun legislation this cycle, this past term. That bill had been sitting and languishing for years and years. It's a very common sense bill, regulating ghost guns, making sure that folks can't buy a gun on the internet that is unregistered. We could have dispensed with that bill right away, but because we have this part-time legislature, it took that long. And very unfortunately, as I'm sure folks here know, like, many people lost their lives to ghost guns or were terribly injured by ghost guns in that time gap. So I do believe things like an expanded session, more staffing levels for offices and more bill writers so that things can move more quickly. Those things are important. I'm a big advocate for those things. I'd like to see this be a full-time job for everyone. But yes, it's certainly my commitment. As long as I can afford to do it, this will be my focus. I want to be working year-round in this district, not just for the 3 months of the year.
Okay, Maryland does have a citizen legislature, and the beauty of that is that people bring in a wide swath of experience, including what they do in the rest of the year. And what you are talking about is a total reformation of the state legislature. And when you look at full-time legislatures on the national level, it leaves a lot to be desired. So in a small state like Maryland, you could be full-time and District 18 voters might be very happy. But are you advocating for a full-time legislature with a longer session? I mean, the cost is monumental. I think that the interest is probably not there on behalf of the citizens, but how would you address that?
I want to be clear. You asked me for my views on this, so I'm sharing them. I'm not headed to the legislature with the intention of making, legislature calendar reform my top priority. I agree with you. I don't think that the will is there right now. I do want to say something though. Number one, I don't agree with the characterization that Maryland is a citizen legislature. Working class people cannot afford to be legislators, let alone even run for office in the state by and large. I think there is maybe one, renter in the whole House, maybe the whole General Assembly. That's Delegate Wilkins. I think when you have a part-time legislature, what you really have is a legislature that is only for wealthy or professional class people who can afford to be part of it. So, I understand that there may be things about full-time legislatures that seem unappealing. That's politics for you, but there are pluses and minuses to both ways of doing things. So I want to make that clear. But I do think that I would like to see more. I would like to see a more open attitude among legislators and among folks like, here in this Breakfast Club, where I'm happy to be every month, hearing folks like, we are very highly informed, obviously highly engaged advocates and watchers of the state political process. As Strong Future Maryland released a poll this year, the great advocacy organization that showed that something like 65% of Maryland residents cannot articulate a single thing that the General Assembly has done, good or bad. So to me, that speaks to, one of the downsides of having part-time legislative work, which is that there's not the level of community engagement that you would really need to see people's priorities be reflected in legislation. I know the legislators do their best under the circumstances, but I just think we need to be honest about what the downsides are.
Someone put a note in the chat box about how other states go breakneck speed. We've seen it in Florida, we've seen it in Georgia, and breakneck speed is not only an advantage, it can be a big disadvantage. And I am not defending perhaps the slowness in Maryland, but I think it does show that sometimes they deliberate, and in the process of a year or two, sometimes it does get better. And just to respond to your note about no one in Maryland can talk about what the legislatures do. Nationwide, people don't know who the president or who their governor is, or they don't have a clue who their congressperson is. So I think that that's not an indicator of much of anything. I mean, people don't understand the Affordable Care Act to this day. They don't understand the process of, for instance, the legislation that has been passed thus far in Congress regarding federal funds to people because of COVID. And I think if you were elected, you definitely have an education component that you're going to have to put forth. Because I think that, what you're expecting of voters is not the norm. So, but maybe you can do that. So as a question I asked of the last candidates, when did you register to vote? How often do you vote? And in what parties have you been registered?
Yeah, I love that question. I registered to vote as soon as I could as a teenager. I did my first door knocking before I could vote. I was 17 years old. I knocked doors for Howard Dean's presidential primary. And I have voted, I think, in every single election that I could, local elections, primaries, national elections. Being an active member of the party is extremely important to me.
When did you move into District 18?
I moved into District 18 unwittingly. We lived in downtown Silver Spring, and we had our second child and needed more space than our 800 square foot condo. We bought a house in Forest Estates, and we moved here almost exactly a year ago, maybe a little bit more than a year now. And it turned out that we were 5 minutes up the road, but we were over the line.
You've been in District 18 for 1 year then?
Yeah, about.
Okay. And someone else asked in the chat, does your staff have NDAs at work?
My campaign staff?
Your campaign staff and where you work, both?
My campaign staff does not. And
where you work?
I don't think that you mean at Bend New York. I don't work at Bend New York any longer, to be clear. I'm running this campaign full time, but
okay.
I don't believe.
Do they have an NDA there?
I don't think so.
And your staff does not have one?
No.
Okay. Okay. So you've talked about a lot of things and we're getting close to the end. What will be your priorities if you are elected state senator in 18?
My top priority is absolutely housing. That is the thing that comes through most clearly when I'm canvassing every day. Folks are really, really struggling with the cost of housing here. Renters are obviously struggling. So as you mentioned, I'm a co-founder of the Montgomery County Racial Equity Network. I serve on the housing committee there. So I am working with renters every day on policies like rent stabilization and streamlining the rental assistance fund. Max mentioned earlier, wishing that we could live in a society with zero evictions. I couldn't agree more. I think that is, a change that starts upstream at the policy level. So that is a big, big goal for me. Evictions are devastating to the social fabric of our communities. They actually lead to increases in things like domestic violence. We have to find a way to not use eviction as a tool. So that is a big policy focus for me. But I'll also say that housing issues affect us, even if we're lucky enough, as I am, to own our own homes. We may have growing or adult children who can't afford to live in Montgomery County because it's so expensive here. We may be burdened by housing costs, by increased property assessments, if we're later in life and retired and on a fixed income. So housing to me is an issue that really cuts across this district. This is a very expensive place to live. I think there are a lot of things that we can do to make housing much more affordable here.
So you talk about housing. What is it that you would advocate for as a legislator?
So there's sort of three legs to the stool of housing policy that I really believe in. One is just cause eviction protection. Right now, we have a really serious issue, even during the sort of COVID halt to evictions, with landlords, especially very large landlords whose primary business is rent seeking, sort of wiggling around eviction protections to evict folks to be able to raise rent. So we need that protection. Number two, we need rent stabilization statewide. This is an issue that is increasingly becoming mainstream in Democratic states. We saw it pass in Oregon several years ago. It's about to pass in New York as well. Maryland is a very expensive state. I think we need stabilization here. It just means that there's predictability in our rental market and there's no speculation. So you don't have these like massive hedge funds like was covered on 60 Minutes a few weeks ago, buying up tons and tons of single family homes and other properties and putting them onto the rental market, because right now rent is unregulated and they know they can make a huge profit by doing that. So we need rent stabilization. The third thing that we need is social housing, which is mixed income, but publicly owned and democratically controlled housing. So I want to support Delegate Vaughn Stewart's bill that's currently languishing in the House, needs some support in the Senate. We can absolutely put millions of dollars more into our public housing funds that already exist. And then we can use that money to empower places like Montgomery County to build mixed income public housing. There's not a lot of time to explain all the ins and outs of that program, but I would encourage folks to look at the new development that's coming to White Oak. The county, actually without the state funding that I want to bring, has very heroically figured out how to organize our first social housing development in White Oak. It's very exciting. It's dedicated housing for seniors. What I want to do at the state level is empower the county to do a whole lot more of that. So those are the three things we can do: increasing affordable supply through social housing, rent stabilization, and just cause eviction protection.
You're saying, I mean, Montgomery County has regulations about rent increases. Are you saying you would do that as a state? I think
right.
that's highly unusual. That would be unique, I believe, right?
No, it's not unique. Once upon a time, it might have been, but as I mentioned, there are several states now that already do that. I think, we would have to see exactly the shape of that bill in the state of Maryland, because it would be new here. And Maryland has, dense metro areas that are high cost of living and more rural areas. So I'm sure there will be details to work out, but it's a conversation we need to start. And it actually, if anything, it gives more regularity and predictability in the market when you work on the state level instead of neighborhood by neighborhood or even town by town.
Okay, so I ask you about priorities. You've mentioned one. Do you have any other priorities?
I have so many, and we're going to run
Well,
out of time. I will keep it snappy.
Wait a minute, let's do 2 more, and then you can have 3 total. Okay?
Great, thank you. A big priority for me is stopping the Beltway expansion. I live by Holy Cross Hospital. I'm very close to the Beltway. This is my neighborhood that's at stake. I'm very, very frustrated that we have not gotten legislative action to stop that project. It's terrible for the climate. It is terrible for transit, and it's terrible for our communities here in District 18. So that is a big, big priority for me, is putting new energy into that effort to stop that expansion. And the third priority that I think I would name is the blueprint and education funding. So I'm sure folks have followed the Kerwin Commission. This is a high information voter, club that we're in here. But you probably also know that the blueprint is not fully funded. And we are going to have a big choice to make in the next 6 years about whether we're going to fund the rest of that program or not. Right now, we've cobbled together, gambling revenues and certain other things to make it solvent. But the real meat of the issue is whether or not we are going to engage in progressive tax reform in Maryland to create a revenue stream that can make the blueprint the floor of our education investment rather than the ceiling. So I'm a big proponent of Senator Paul Pinsky's work on taxes in the Senate. I think we need to have a reformed income tax system in the state of Maryland to create that revenue to make sure that our schools are getting the funding that they need. So I would say those are my top 3.
Before we go to your closing, one last question. How many times have you lobbied in Annapolis?
Oh, I don't know. Probably 5, something like that. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Oh, okay, 5 times. Okay. So now we have come to the end. So it's time for your closing. First of all, I want to say thank you for coming today. And what would you like to say in closing?
Well, I'm very happy to have been here. It's a little odd, not to have my opponent, in the space so that we can actually hash out some of the differences in the issues. I think what I can say is that I really encourage folks to look into, our records and what we've been doing for the past several years. I think that District 18 is a progressive district. I also think, again, because I have a lot of friends who do work on progressive issues in Annapolis, there's been a clear lack of leadership on those issues. And, I certainly, as an advocate, as somebody who's engaged at different times in Annapolis, I have often felt like I'm having to fight politically with my own, senator, rather than having my senator fighting for my views in the broader General Assembly. And I'm sure folks here know that Montgomery County, we lead on progressive issues in the state. And if we don't lead, the whole state falls behind. We didn't have a chance to talk much about climate policy this morning. But, the fact that we managed to get climate solutions now passed, but without building electrification, I think is a great case in point of we do not have, another 10 or 15 years to keep negotiating with utility companies on how we get methane out of our atmosphere. But that is what keeps happening. And the lack of climate champions, enough climate champions in our delegation, really contributes to that. So I think that's that's my close, is that I really encourage folks to think about how you want Montgomery County to show up and lead in the Senate, and how you want our district to show up and lead in the Senate, because I think that we can do better.
Okay, thank you very much, Max. And we will be back next month on May 9th with the judge candidates. Thank you very much. And have a good day. Happy Sine Die. And Rosh Hashanah and Easter are coming up. So no matter what your religion, have a very happy holiday season. Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Happy
Take
Holy
care.
Week, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good week.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming. It's been an interesting day. Bye. Thanks. See you next time.
Bye. Thank you. Bye. Thank